Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we dive into today's case, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Now let's get into the story. The sun had just begun its slow crawl over the horizon, casting a dull, gray light through the thick canopy of pines. It was earlier than usual, and the crisp autumn air bit at my exposed skin as I zipped up my jacket and shouldered my gear. My name's Eric Daniels, a ranger here in the dense woods of Maine, and I've seen just about everything these forests have to offer. At least, I thought I had. Today started like any other. I was checking the trails near Dead River, making sure the last night's rain hadn't caused any flooding or downed trees. The river itself was louder than usual, swollen from the recent storms, crashing over rocks and foaming at the edges. There was something soothing about the constant rush of water, even though it felt more threatening today. I moved along the edge, eyes scanning the forest floor for debris or signs of animals. Then I saw them. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe shadows playing on the mud. But as I got closer, the sight became unmistakable. Footprints. Massive footprints. I knelt beside the first one, running my hand over the edges. The depression in the soft earth was deep, much deeper than a human could make without wearing heavy boots. But it wasn't a boot print. This was bare, clearly defined. 5 toes, longer than they should have been, and a wide heel that left an impression nearly twice the size of my own foot. What the hell? I muttered to myself, straightening up and glancing around. I hadn't seen anything like it before. Sure, we'd get some weird prints now and again, bears, moose, sometimes even hikers with strange gear. But this was different. I looked around again, scanning the forest. It was quiet, eerily so. The usual chirp of birds and rustling of small animals seemed absent, replaced by the steady roar of the river. The tracks were fresh. The edges of the prints were still sharp, not yet eroded by the elements or time. Whatever left these prints had passed through here recently, maybe within the last few hours. A chill crept down my spine, and I fought back the instinct to call for backup. What would I even say? Hey, this is Ranger Daniels. I've got some big footprints by the river. Yeah, that'd go over real well. Still, something gnawed at me. I couldn't just leave them without knowing more. I followed the trail. The footprints, spaced unnaturally far apart, led deeper into the trees, away from the river. Each step seemed to pull me into the dense forest, the air growing cooler as I moved away from the water's edge. Eric, you're getting in over your head, I muttered to myself, shaking my head as I stepped over a fallen log. The tracks kept going, leading me further off the marked trail, into parts of the forest I rarely ventured alone. But there was something almost hypnotic about them, like they were drawing me forward. I hesitated again, glancing back toward the river. Maybe it was time to turn around, head back, and file a report. But curiosity kept pushing me forward, a nagging feeling that I needed to know what left those prints. As I pressed on, I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. The forest had become oppressively quiet, the trees closing in around me, their dark trunks like silent sentinels. The wind had died down completely, leaving the air heavy and still. Snap! I froze. The sharp crack of a branch breaking in the distance made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I turned toward the sound, squinting into the gloom between the trees, but I couldn't see anything. My heart thudded in my chest, and I cursed under my breath, reaching instinctively for my radio. My fingers hovered over the button for a moment, but then I stopped. What was I going to say? That I heard a branch break? The guys back at the station would have a field day with that. I took a deep breath and kept moving, but now my senses were on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the trees seemed amplified. I followed the tracks carefully, making sure not to disturb them as I moved deeper into the forest. The tracks led me uphill now, the ground becoming steeper and more uneven. My legs burned as I climbed, each step bringing me closer to the top of a small ridge. The air was colder here, the thick canopy above blocking out what little light the sun had to offer. My breath came in short puffs, visible in the cool air. Then I smelled it. It was faint at first, just a hint of something foul carried on the wind. But as I continued climbing, the stench grew stronger, rotting, putrid, like a dead animal left too long in the sun. I covered my nose with my sleeve, grimacing. It was coming from just beyond the ridge. I hesitated again, my hand going to my belt where my knife rested. It wasn't much, but it was something. I'd seen enough predators in these woods to know that sometimes curiosity could get you killed. But I couldn't stop myself. With one final push, I crested the ridge, and that's when I saw it. A clearing lay ahead, the trees thinning out around a small, rocky outcrop. And in the center of the clearing, barely visible through the shadows, was a massive, hulking figure. It moved between the trees, slow and deliberate. Covered in dark, matted fur, its back was to me, but I could see the outline of its broad, muscular frame. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, its head nearly brushing the lower branches of the pines. I froze, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run, to get as far away from that thing as possible. But my legs wouldn't move. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching as the creature moved through the clearing. It sniffed the air, its head tilting slightly, and I saw its face for the first time, twisted, monstrous, with deep-set eyes and a mouth filled with jagged teeth. This wasn't an animal. This was something else. Something evil. Suddenly it stopped. Its massive head turned toward me, and those dark, malevolent eyes locked onto mine. Panic surged through me, and before I could react, it charged. The ground shook with the force of its steps, the air filled with the sound of snapping branches and its guttural growl. I barely had time to raise my arms in defense before it was on me, a wall of fur and muscle. The impact was like getting hit by a truck. My body flew backward, tumbling down the steep slope. I crashed through the underbrush, branches clawing at my skin as I rolled down, the world spinning in a blur of green and brown. When I finally hit the bottom, the wind was knocked out of me. Pain shot through my body, my vision swimming as I tried to pull myself up. Everything hurt. My head throbbed, and the taste of copper filled my mouth. But when I looked up, the creature was gone. The clearing was empty, the only sign of its presence the faint rustling of the leaves above me. I lay there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, my mind racing. I needed to report this. I needed help. But even as I fumbled for my radio, I knew no one was going to believe what just happened. I staggered to my feet, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. My head pounded, the world spinning around me as I leaned against a nearby tree for support. I was disoriented, shaky, but I was alive. Barely. I glanced back up the slope where I had fallen, my eyes darting between the trees. The creature, the thing that had knocked me down, was gone. The woods above were still and quiet again, almost like the attack had never happened. But it had happened. I could still feel the deep ache in my ribs, the sting of fresh cuts on my arms, and the unmistakable smell of its foul, decaying scent hanging in the air. "Jesus," I muttered, wincing as I wiped the blood from a cut on my forehead. My heart still raced, thumping hard in my chest as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I reached for my radio, fumbling with it, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I needed to call this in. I needed backup. The radio crackled as I clicked the button, but no words came out. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the device in my hand. What was I supposed to say? That I had been attacked by what? A bear? No, that wasn't a bear. It wasn't any animal I had ever seen before. Not even close. I couldn't explain this away, and the more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it sounded in my own head. Who would believe me? I released the button and shoved the radio back onto my belt. I needed more time to think, to process what had just happened. I needed to figure out what to do next. The air around me felt different now, colder, heavier. It wasn't just the cool autumn breeze. There was a strange stillness in the air, an unnatural quiet that settled over the forest like a blanket. No birds, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just silence. A shiver ran down my spine, and I instinctively pulled my jacket tighter around me. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to turn around and get the hell out of there, but my feet refused to move. I stood frozen, scanning the dense wall of trees around me, half expecting the creature to come crashing back through the undergrowth at any second. But it didn't. Instead, there was just the unnerving quiet, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. I started walking again, slower this time, moving cautiously in the direction of the river. My mind raced with questions, and I kept replaying the moment over and over. What was that thing? How could something that big, that powerful, just disappear? The prints had been real. I wasn't imagining them. And the attack. I could feel it in every bruised and battered part of my body. No way that was in my head. But something still didn't add up. Snap. The sharp crack of a branch breaking nearby sent a surge of adrenaline through me. I spun toward the sound, heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing. Just trees, tall, silent, unmoving. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. No response. Just more silence. I scanned the forest again, my eyes flicking from shadow to shadow, looking for any sign of movement. Every fiber of my being was tense, waiting for the next attack. I thought I caught a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned, there was nothing. The unease was growing. Every step I took felt like it was being watched. My mind raced, trying to rationalize the feeling, but it was like the forest itself had eyes, tracking my every move. I reached for my radio again, clicking it on, my voice tight with tension. Ranger Daniels to base. Do you copy? The radio crackled, static hissing back at me, but there was no response. I tried again. Base, this is Daniels. Does anyone copy? Still nothing. Just that same, low crackling static. I cursed under my breath, shaking the radio as if that would fix the problem. No one had mentioned any communication issues this morning, and I hadn't moved far enough from the main trails to lose signal. So why wasn't anyone responding? A cold pit settled in my stomach as I clipped the radio back to my belt. Something wasn't right, and as much as I wanted to call for help, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on my own out here. No one was coming. Not yet. I pressed on, my senses on high alert now. Every rustle of leaves, every gust of wind through the trees sent my heart racing, but the deeper I moved into the forest, the more I felt it. That heavy, oppressive sense of something just wrong lurking in the air. It wasn't just the quiet. It was the way the trees themselves seemed to close in around me, as if they were trying to keep me here. Keep me trapped. I stopped again, trying to get my bearings. The tracks had led me this way, but now, as I glanced down at the forest floor, they seemed to have faded. The mud was thicker here, the leaves scattered, and the ground uneven. It was harder to make out any distinct prints. But the scent lingered. That same foul, rotting odor that had hit me just before the attack. It was fainter now, but still there, hanging in the cold air like a reminder. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't far. I could feel it. My hand hovered over my knife. I hadn't needed to use it before. Most of the animals out here were more afraid of us than we were of them. But this was different. I felt like prey, hunted in my own woods. As I stood there, trying to decide whether to keep moving forward or turn back, I heard it again. That faint rustling, just out of sight. It wasn't the wind this time. It was something moving. Closer. I tightened my grip on the handle of the knife, my pulse pounding in my ears as I backed up slowly, eyes scanning the trees. My mouth was dry, and I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. _snap, _closer this time. Come on, show yourself, I whispered under my breath, more to myself than anything else. My voice was barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from behind me, the sound of branches breaking and something large moving through the undergrowth. I whipped around, but I couldn't see it, just flashes of dark fur between the trees moving fast. Shit! I gasped, stumbling back as the sounds grew louder, closer. I felt the ground slip beneath my feet, the slope steeper than I'd realized. My boot caught on a root, and I fell, slamming into the ground hard. For a moment, everything was a blur. Pain shot through my leg as I rolled down the slope, dirt and leaves flying up around me. When I finally came to a stop, my body aching, I looked up, but whatever had been chasing me was gone again. The woods were silent. I was alone. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, my mind racing. It was still out there, watching, waiting. I could feel it, but I was powerless to do anything about it. I lay at the bottom of the slope, the wind knocked out of me, my chest rising and falling in ragged, desperate breaths. Pain radiated through my side where I'd hit the ground, and my leg throbbed where I'd twisted it during the fall. For a few moments, I just lay there, trying to catch my breath, staring up at the patchwork of pine branches that loomed overhead, blotting out the pale sky. What the hell just happened? The question looped in my mind, but I already knew the answer. It happened. The thing that had attacked me, that massive, hulking shape, was still out there, somewhere in the woods. I sat up slowly, every muscle protesting as I moved, wincing as I gingerly touched the bruise forming on my ribs. The forest was deathly silent again, the kind of silence that felt unnatural in a place like this. Normally, even in the early morning, the woods were alive with sound, birds chirping, squirrels rustling through the underbrush, the distant hum of insects. But now there was nothing, just the dull roar of the river far behind me, and the sound of my own heavy breathing. I glanced around, half expecting to see the creature charging at me again, but there was nothing. No movement, no sign of it. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, but my body told me otherwise. The bruises, the cuts on my arms and face, those were real. I hadn't imagined those, and I hadn't imagined the foul, decaying stench that still lingered in the air. I stood up, wobbly at first, and tested my leg. It hurt like hell, but I could still walk. I looked back up the slope, seeing the trail of broken branches and disturbed leaves where I'd tumbled down. My flashlight lay shattered nearby, the glass cracked and useless now. I cursed under my breath, bending down to grab it, even though I knew it wouldn't be any good to me. Just as I straightened up, a smell hit me again, stronger this time. The same rancid, rotting odor, like something dead had been left to decay in the sun for days. I gagged, covering my mouth with my sleeve as I turned toward the source. The stench was coming from the direction of the clearing ahead, just beyond the thick trees. My heart pounded harder in my chest as I took a cautious step forward, my hand instinctively going to the knife on my belt. The weight of the blade was comforting, but I knew deep down that it wouldn't be much use if that thing came at me again. I moved through the trees, my eyes scanning the dense underbrush for any sign of movement. The clearing was just up ahead, a small break in the otherwise dense woods. I could see the light filtering through the gaps in the branches, casting long shadows across the forest floor. And then I saw it, a massive shape, hunched over in the middle of the clearing, partially hidden by the trees. My heart stopped. It was the creature. It had its back to me, its massive shoulders rising and falling with each breath. Dark, matted fur covered its body, and even from this distance, I could see its sheer size, easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was crouched low, its arms hanging almost to the ground, fingers curling into the dirt. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I watched it. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. There was no doubt now, this wasn't an animal. Not in the way we understood animals. This thing was something else, something ancient and powerful, something that shouldn't exist. For a moment, I thought about turning around and running, putting as much distance between myself and the creature as possible. But my body refused to move. It was like I was rooted to the spot, trapped between fear and a twisted sense of curiosity. I needed to know what it was, where it came from. I needed to understand. Then, as if sensing my presence, the creature's head jerked up. It sniffed the air, its massive, shaggy shoulders tensing. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I took an involuntary step back, the sound of a twig snapping under my boot echoing through the stillness. The creature turned. Its face was even worse than I had imagined. Twisted, monstrous, with deep-set eyes that gleamed in the dim light, full of malice and hunger. Its nose was flat and wide, almost ape-like, and its mouth, the mouth, was filled with rows of jagged teeth, yellowed and sharp. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its chest as it stood to its full height, towering over the clearing, its eyes locking onto me. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. I was face to face with it now, and every primal instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But it was too late. With a deafening roar, the creature lunged toward me, its massive arms swinging wildly as it charged. I barely had time to react. I turned and ran, my legs moving faster than they ever had, branches and brambles tearing at my clothes as I crashed through the undergrowth. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the trees with the force of a freight train, the ground shaking beneath its weight. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root, and I went down hard, my hands digging into the dirt as I scrambled to get up. The growling was right behind me now, louder, closer. I could feel the hot, rancid breath of the creature on the back of my neck. Desperate, I whipped around, pulling the knife from my belt. It was a small blade, nothing more than a hunting knife, but it was all I had. I held it out in front of me, my hands shaking uncontrollably as the creature bore down on me. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. The creature stopped, just a few feet away. Its eyes, those dark, soulless pits, locked onto mine. For a moment, we stood there face to face, neither of us moving. I could feel the heat radiating off of it, the sheer power in its massive frame. Then, with a snarl, it swiped at me with one of its massive hands. I barely had time to react. The blow sent me flying backward, crashing into a tree with enough force to knock the wind out of me. My vision blurred, and I struggled to stay conscious, gasping for air as pain shot through my chest. The knife was gone, knocked out of my hand, and I was defenseless. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My limbs felt heavy, useless. I could hear the creature moving toward me again, its growl low and menacing, but I couldn't move. This was it. But just as it reached me, the creature stopped. It lifted its head, sniffing the air again, and for reasons I couldn't understand, it hesitated. Slowly, it backed away, retreating into the trees, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. I lay there, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My body throbbed with pain, but I was alive. The creature was gone, but I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. I lay in the dirt, gasping for breath, my whole body throbbing with pain. My ribs felt like they had been crushed under the weight of the beast's blow, and every breath sent sharp stabs of agony through my chest. My vision blurred for a moment as I tried to pull myself upright, using the trunk of a nearby tree for support. My hands were slick with blood. Whether mine or something else's, I couldn't be sure. I had to move. That much I knew. If I stayed here, it would come back. And next time, it wouldn't hesitate. I couldn't count on another moment of strange mercy or distraction to save me. I needed to get out of these woods. I glanced around, eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. The creature was gone, at least for now, but the woods still felt oppressive, alive with a lingering presence. I forced my legs to move, wincing with each step as I hobbled toward the river. The sound of rushing water was my only guide, cutting through the unnatural silence that had taken over the forest. "Come on, Eric. Move. Keep going," I muttered to myself, half delirious from pain and fear. The more I talked, the less alone I felt, like it was some kind of flimsy defense against the terror that threatened to consume me. I stumbled forward, my pace uneven, the forest spinning around me. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made my heart leap into my throat. I felt like I was being hunted, like the thing was just waiting for the right moment to strike again. The shadows between the trees seemed darker now, deeper, as if they were hiding something monstrous, something just beyond my vision. I didn't dare look back. If I looked back, I might see it, and I wasn't sure I could handle that. As I pushed through the underbrush, my mind kept replaying the attack, those eyes, that guttural roar, the overwhelming sense of malevolence that seemed to radiate from the creature. It wasn't just a wild animal. I'd seen enough bears and wolves in my time to know this was something far worse. It was intelligent, calculating, and it wanted me dead. I had to focus. If I could just make it to the river, I'd be able to follow it back to the station. The thought of the station, of safety, was the only thing keeping me going. My radio was still strapped to my belt, but I didn't dare stop to use it. Not yet. The last thing I needed was to be distracted when that thing came for me again. The ground began to slope downward, and I knew I was getting closer to the river. I could hear the water louder now, rushing over rocks, pulling me toward it like a lifeline. I forced myself to move faster, ignoring the pain that flared with every step, every breath. Then I smelled it again. That same putrid stench, thick and choking, filling the air around me like a cloud. My stomach lurched, while rising in my throat. I stopped dead in my tracks, scanning the trees around me, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Where are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the river. The air was thick with tension, like the forest was holding its breath. I could feel it again, that oppressive, suffocating feeling that I wasn't alone. That it was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I took a slow step backward, my hand resting on the hilt of my knife, even though I knew it would do little good if the creature came at me again. I heard the faintest rustle of leaves behind me, and I froze. My heart raced, my blood thundering in my ears as I turned slowly, every muscle in my body tensed and ready to bolt. But there was nothing, just trees. Thick, towering pines, their shadows stretching long and dark across the forest floor. I exhaled shakily, forcing myself to keep moving. The river was close, maybe just 100 yards away. I just had to make it there. Once I got to the water, I'd have a better chance. Maybe the sound of the river would cover my movements. Maybe the creature wouldn't follow me into the open. I broke through the last line of trees, stumbling onto the rocky bank of the river. The water rushed past, swollen from the recent rains, crashing over the rocks in a chaotic surge. For a brief moment, the roar of the river drowned out everything else, the silence, the fear, the oppressive weight of the forest behind me. I knelt by the water, splashing some on my face to clear my head. My leg was throbbing now, a dull, persistent ache that made it harder to keep moving. But I couldn't stop. Not yet. I pulled out my radio with trembling hands, clicking it on. "Ranger Daniels to base," I said, my voice shaky. "I need help. Do you copy?" Static. I tried again, pressing the button harder, as if that would make a difference. "This is Ranger Daniels. I'm down by the river, near Dead River Trailhead. I've been attacked. Do you copy?" More static. "Damn it," I shouted, slamming the radio against the ground in frustration. The burst of pain in my chest from the movement reminded me of the creature's raw power, and the flash of anger was quickly replaced by cold fear. I was alone out here, and no one was coming. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking, my body screaming in protest. I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving. The river would lead me back, but it would be hours before I reached the station at this pace. I turned and started walking along the riverbank, my eyes darting between the trees, every instinct screaming at me to keep going, keep moving. The sky was beginning to darken, the light fading as evening settled over the forest. The shadows stretched longer, deeper, and the oppressive silence returned, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or snap of a twig. Each sound made me flinch, my heart pounding as I strained to see through the gloom. Then, just ahead, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The tracks. The same massive footprints I'd found earlier, leading away from the river and into the trees. Fresh. It was still out here. Close. Too close. I backed away from the prints, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I scanned the treeline. The oppressive, suffocating feeling returned, stronger than ever, pressing down on me from all sides. The trees felt like they were closing in, the shadows growing darker, thicker. I didn't wait any longer. I turned and ran, pushing my battered body as hard as I could. The river roared beside me, the sound deafening, but all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears. Every step felt like a marathon, my legs screaming in protest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. By the time I reached the clearing near the trailhead, night had fully descended. The creature hadn't followed me, or at least, I hadn't seen it again. But that didn't mean it wasn't still out there, watching, waiting. I collapsed onto a rock, gasping for air, my body aching and battered. The station was still miles away, and I had no idea how long it would take me to get there. But for now, I was safe. At least, I hoped I was. As I sat there, trying to catch my breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, somewhere in the shadows. Watching. Night had settled in, draping the forest in a thick, impenetrable darkness. The sky above was overcast, with no moon or stars to guide me. The air had turned bitterly cold, and every breath I took sent a sharp chill deep into my lungs. My whole body ached from the run along the river, and the fear of what might still be lurking in the shadows gnawed at the edges of my sanity. I sat on a large rock, my legs trembling uncontrollably, and tried to calm my breathing. I had no choice but to keep moving, but I needed a moment to collect myself. My head throbbed with a dull ache, a reminder of the fall and the desperate escape from whatever that thing was. I had been a ranger for years, had seen my share of danger in the woods. Wild animals, hikers lost for days, severe storms that left entire trails impassable. But nothing, had prepared me for this. My thoughts raced in circles as I tried to piece together what had happened, but it was like my mind refused to accept the reality of it. I glanced at my radio again. The small screen cracked from where I had thrown it in frustration earlier. It had been my lifeline, and now it was as broken as my resolve. "Get it together, Eric," I whispered to myself, gripping the edge of the rock beneath me until my knuckles turned white. I needed to focus, needed to survive. But how? I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself had changed, as if it had become hostile, no longer the familiar terrain I had spent years patrolling. The rustling of leaves made me flinch, and my hand shot to my belt, only to find the empty sheath where my knife should have been. It had been knocked from my grip when the creature attacked, and I hadn't been able to find it since. My heartbeat quickened again. I was unarmed, alone, and deep in the woods with no way of contacting anyone. Suddenly, a distant sound broke the stillness, a low, guttural growl that echoed through the trees. I froze. It was faint, but unmistakable. The creature was out there, somewhere in the dark. I strained my ears, hoping to catch more of the sound, but the forest was silent again. The growl had lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't safe. Not even close. I stood up, every muscle in my body protesting the movement. I couldn't stay here. The trail back to the ranger station was still miles away, and I didn't know how long I could keep moving in my condition. My leg throbbed with every step, but I had no choice. I needed to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. As I stumbled forward, the trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Every gust of wind rattled the leaves, making them sound like whispers in the dark. I imagined the creature, hidden just beyond the tree line, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. My mind raced. I had to come up with a plan, had to think of something that would give me a fighting chance. The trail was still hours away, and there was no telling how much longer I could last out here. A sudden thought struck me. What if I tried to hide? If I could find somewhere to hunker down for the night, maybe the creature would lose my scent. Maybe it would give up and move on. But as soon as the idea formed, I dismissed it. This thing wasn't just some mindless predator. It had been stalking me, calculating its moves. It was relentless, and I had no reason to believe it would simply give up. No, hiding wasn't an option. I needed to keep moving. I needed to get to the station. My legs shook with exhaustion, but I forced myself to keep going. The forest was a maze of darkness, and I had to trust my instincts, relying on years of experience navigating these woods to guide me back. But the unease that had settled in earlier was growing stronger. Something felt off. The trees, the wind, even the ground beneath my feet. It all felt foreign now, like I was walking through a place I no longer understood. A noise broke the silence again, this time closer. I stopped in my tracks, straining to hear. The sound was faint, like soft footsteps crunching through the leaves. My heart hammered in my chest as I peered into the darkness. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift and move, and my mind filled in the gaps with terrifying images of the creature looming just out of sight. I stepped backward, my pulse quickening, my throat dry with fear. The sound grew louder, closer, like it was circling me. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to move. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. I stood there, frozen, waiting for the next sound, but it didn't come. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't tell if the creature was still there, watching, or if it had slunk back into the shadows, waiting for a better opportunity to strike. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as sandpaper. "Come on, Eric," I whispered to myself, trying to summon the courage to move. "Don't freeze now." I forced myself to take a step, and then another, my movements slow and deliberate. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to bolt, to run as fast as I could, but I knew that would be suicide. I had to stay calm. I had to keep moving, no matter how much my mind begged me to panic. As I pushed forward, the forest grew darker, more oppressive. The trees seemed to twist and bend in unnatural ways, their branches gnarled and claw-like. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still there, following me in the shadows, just out of sight. It was toying with me, I realized, stalking me like a predator plays with its prey before the kill. I reached a small clearing and stopped, gasping for breath. My legs felt like they could give out at any moment. The pain in my chest and leg had become almost unbearable, and my head spun with exhaustion. I had been walking for hours, but it felt like I hadn't made any progress. I wasn't even sure if I was still on the right path. The forest had twisted around me like a living maze, and I had lost my bearings long ago. I needed help. I needed someone to believe me. Pulling out my radio again, I clicked it on, praying for a miracle. "Base, this is Ranger Daniels. Do you copy? Please, anyone, do you copy?" My voice was shaky, barely more than a whisper. The radio crackled with static, mocking me. No one was coming. I was on my own. "Damn it!" I shouted, throwing the radio to the ground. It skidded across the dirt, useless. I collapsed to my knees, my head in my hands. I was trapped out here, with no way of calling for help, no weapon, and no idea how much longer I could keep going. And worst of all, the creature was still out there. I could feel its presence, lurking just beyond the edge of the clearing, waiting for me to make my final mistake. As I sat there, gasping for breath, a new thought crept into my mind. I wasn't going to make it out of here alive. I was going to die in these woods, and no one would ever know. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a faint gray glow through the thick canopy of trees. It was weak, barely enough to break through the oppressive darkness of the night, but it was something. I had survived the night, though I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. I leaned heavily against a tree, my body aching and my mind clouded with exhaustion. My leg throbbed with each step, and every breath I took felt like fire in my chest. I had lost count of how many hours I had been moving, how many times I had thought the creature was right behind me, waiting for the right moment to strike again. But now, with the light slowly pushing back the shadows, there was a small glimmer of hope. The sun was rising, and I had made it through the night. Yet the feeling of dread still lingered in the air, as if the forest itself had not yet decided to let me go. I wiped the sweat from my brow and scanned my surroundings. The river was no longer in sight, and I wasn't sure how far I had strayed from it during my desperate flight. The landscape around me was unfamiliar, a maze of trees and underbrush that all looked the same. I was lost. I stood there, forcing myself to remain still for a moment. I needed to get my bearings. In my panic, I had left the trail behind, and now I was deep in the wilderness with no clear sense of direction. The sound of the rushing river had faded hours ago, leaving me surrounded by nothing but the eerie silence of the forest. The tracks. I needed to find the tracks again. That thought sent a fresh wave of fear coursing through me. I knew following the tracks wasn't wise, but they were the only sign of the creature's movements, the only clue I had about where it might be lurking. If I could find them again, I might at least know where underscore not underscore to go. I forced myself to keep moving, even though every step felt like a battle against the pain and fatigue weighing me down. The trees began to thin slightly as I limped forward, the first real break in the forest that I had seen in hours. The light filtering through the trees seemed stronger now, casting long shadows across the forest floor. That's when I saw it, the unmistakable indentations in the soft earth just ahead. Massive, deep footprints, just like the ones I had found before. The creature's tracks. Damn it, I muttered under my breath, my heart pounding in my chest again. The tracks were fresh, too fresh. I crouched down to inspect them, my fingers brushing over the edges of the prints. They hadn't been here long. Maybe an hour, 2 at most. It was still close. I rose slowly, scanning the forest around me, every nerve on edge. The creature was out there, somewhere, and it had been here recently. I felt like a mouse caught in a trap, and the cat was circling. The wind stirred the trees above me, and the faint rustle of leaves sent a shiver down my spine. I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let my guard down. I had made it through the night, but that didn't mean I was safe. Not yet. I kept moving, using the tracks as a guide, but making sure to give them a wide berth. Every step felt like it could be my last, and the sense of being hunted never left me. It was like the creature was toying with me, leading me deeper into the woods, knowing that I was getting weaker with each passing minute. My thoughts raced as I tried to figure out a plan. The station was still miles away, and I was in no condition to run anymore. My leg was barely holding up, and the throbbing pain in my ribs made it hard to breathe. I needed to find the river again, follow it back to the trailhead. Then, through the trees, I caught a glimpse of something that made my heart stop. A small clearing up ahead, with a scattering of rocks and a faint trail leading away from it. My heart leapt in my chest. That was the trail. I had found it. Relief flooded through me, momentarily easing the weight of fear and exhaustion that had been pressing down on me for hours. I staggered forward, quickening my pace despite the pain, desperate to reach the trail. But as I neared the edge of the clearing, I froze. There, standing just at the other side of the clearing, was the creature. It was hunched over, its massive frame towering above the surrounding brush, dark fur matted with dirt and grime. Its back was turned to me, but I could see the powerful muscles rippling beneath its fur as it moved. It sniffed the air, as if searching for something. As if searching for _me_. My breath caught in my throat, and I slowly backed away, careful not to make a sound. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure the creature would hear it. I couldn't believe it. It had been right there, just ahead of me, and I had almost walked straight into it. I watched, barely breathing, as the creature turned its head slightly, its black eyes scanning the forest. For a moment, I thought it had seen me, but it seemed to lose interest, turning back toward the trail. With a low, rumbling growl, it moved off into the trees, disappearing from sight. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my whole body trembling. It was still close, too close. If I made a sound, if I stepped on a branch or rustled the leaves, it would come back. And this time, I knew it wouldn't hesitate. I waited until I could no longer hear the creature moving through the forest before I let out a shaky breath. My hands were trembling, and my legs felt like they could give out at any moment. I was so close to the trail, so close to safety, but the creature was still out there, stalking me. I forced myself to move, every step slow and deliberate as I made my way to the trailhead. My body was screaming at me to run, to put as much distance between me and the clearing as possible, but I knew that running would only draw attention. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the faint trail. I could see the path winding through the trees, leading back toward the ranger station. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I had found it. I was going to make it. But as I stood there, staring down the trail, something inside me knew that it wasn't over. The creature was still out there, watching. It had let me live for now, but I could feel its presence in the air, in the stillness of the forest. It wasn't gone. It was waiting, biding its time. I started down the trail, limping, my body aching with every step. The sun was rising higher now, casting long shadows across the ground. But even in the light of day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The creature was still out there, and it wasn't finished with me yet. When I finally reached the ranger station, the sun had fully risen, casting a golden light over the surrounding trees. But the warmth of the morning sun did nothing to ease the cold fear that still clung to my bones. I stumbled through the door, barely able to keep my balance, my clothes torn and covered in mud, blood smeared across my arms and face. I was greeted by the familiar smell of coffee and the chatter of voices, but everything felt distant, muted. My mind was still in the woods, replaying the events of the night over and over. The attack, the chase, the creature's twisted, monstrous face. I couldn't shake the feeling that even though I had made it back to the station, I wasn't safe. Not really. Daniels. Jesus, what happened to you? It was Mike, the senior ranger, rushing over as soon as he saw me. His eyes widened when he took in my appearance. I was attacked, I managed to say, my voice hoarse. My throat was dry, and my legs were trembling so badly I could barely stand. Attacked? Mike repeated, his brow furrowing as he helped me over to a chair. I sank into it, my body screaming in protest. By what? You look like you got mauled by a bear or something. It wasn't a bear. My words came out more forceful than I intended, and I saw the flicker of doubt cross Mike's face. It was something else. Something big. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't like anything I've ever seen before. Mike exchanged a glance with the others in the room, the kind of look that made my stomach drop. The kind of look that said _, he's lost it _. I could feel the skepticism building in the room, the weight of disbelief pressing down on me. But I pushed on. They had to believe me. They had _ too. The tracks, Mike. I found these tracks along the river, massive footprints, bigger than anything you'd expect to see out there. I followed them, and then it came at me. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to steady myself. I thought it was going to kill me. I barely made it out. Mike's expression softened slightly, but there was still doubt in his eyes. Eric, I've known you a long time. You've been a ranger for years. You've seen your share of strange things in these woods. But a creature? What are we talking about here? A bear? A wolf? It couldn't be anything else. I'm telling you, it wasn't a bear. My voice rose, anger and frustration boiling over. It stood on two legs, Mike. It was massive, covered in fur, and its eyes were full of hate, like it knew exactly what it was doing. This thing wasn't just some animal. It was something else. I could feel the weight of their stares now, the disbelief solidifying into quiet judgment. The others in the station were silent, their eyes darting between Mike and me. No one spoke. No one wanted to be the first to call me crazy, but I could feel it in the air. Mike sighed and knelt down in front of me, his tone softer now, more measured. Eric, listen. You've had a rough night, clearly. Maybe you got turned around, maybe you saw a bear or... It wasn't a damn bear. I shouted, standing up suddenly, my head spinning with the effort. The room seemed to tilt for a moment, and I had to steady myself on the back of the chair. I _no_ what I saw. Mike stood up too, hands raised as if trying to calm me down. Okay. Just, let's take a step back. You're hurt, you're exhausted, and you've been out there for who knows how long. Let's get you cleaned up, and then we'll head out and take a look. All right? We'll find those tracks, we'll figure this out. His words were calm, reasonable, but I could hear the condescension underneath. They didn't believe me. Not really. To them, I was just another ranger who had spent too many years alone in the woods, who had finally snapped after one too many long nights. I'm not crazy, Mike, I said, my voice lower now, pleading. I know what I saw. This thing, it's out there. And it's dangerous. Mike looked at me for a long moment before nodding. I'm not saying you're crazy, Eric. I believe you saw something. But we've got to stay calm and figure this out together. Let's just get you checked out, and we'll go from there, all right? I nodded, though I knew deep down that it wouldn't matter what they found, or didn't find. The tracks would be gone by now, washed away by the rain or trampled by the wildlife. There wouldn't be any proof of what happened. It would just be my word against the quiet skepticism that hung in the air. As they helped me clean up and bandage my cuts, the others talked quietly amongst themselves, casting furtive glances in my direction. I could hear snippets of their conversation. Words like exhaustion, stress, and hallucination floated through the room, but I tried to tune them out. When Mike finally came over again, he had that same look of quiet doubt in his eyes. Eric, I'm going to take a team out to the area you described. We'll look for the tracks, see if we can find anything. Why don't you stay here, rest up? You've been through enough. I shook my head. I'm coming with you. Mike frowned. Eric, you're in no condition to. I'm not sitting here while you all go out there without knowing what you're up against. I interrupted, my voice firm. I'm coming. Mike hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, but you stay with the group. No wandering off. We don't need anyone else getting lost out there. The search was exactly what I had expected. We returned to the spot where I had found the tracks, but by the time we got there, they were gone. The rain had washed away most of the evidence, and what was left could easily be mistaken for something mundane. A half-formed impression in the mud, a broken branch, nothing concrete. Nothing that would convince anyone of the truth. The others muttered to themselves as they combed through the area, but I could see it on their faces. The doubt, the disbelief. Even Mike, who had been the most willing to give me the benefit of the doubt, seemed less sure now. "Eric," Mike said after what felt like hours of fruitless searching, "there's nothing here. No tracks, no sign of anything unusual. Maybe you were just... I don't know, it's easy to get disoriented out here, especially after a long night." I felt a surge of frustration and anger rise in my chest. "I'm telling you, Mike, it was here. It was right here." Mike put a hand on my shoulder, his expression sympathetic but firm. "Let's call it for today. You need to rest. We'll come back out tomorrow, fresh eyes." But I knew, as we packed up and headed back to the station, that no one would believe me. Not really. The creature had been here, but now it was gone, leaving me with nothing but my own word and the bruises to prove it. They would write it off as exhaustion, stress, a bear, anything that made sense. But I knew the truth. And that truth was that I had seen something terrible, something real. And it was still out there. Days had passed since the attack, but the images were as vivid as ever in my mind. The massive footprints pressed deep into the mud, the creature's hulking silhouette looming in the trees, its snarling, hateful eyes. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. I tried to put it behind me, to tell myself it was over. The station had been busy, and Mike had insisted I take some time off to recover. But no amount of rest was going to erase what had happened. The ache in my ribs had started to fade, but the bruises in my mind were still raw, and they ran far deeper than anything physical. No one believed me. Not really. Not Mike, not the other rangers. They had humored me for a while, humoring the exhausted ranger who had been out too long on his own. And when they couldn't find any evidence, no tracks, no signs of a struggle, everyone chalked it up to stress, a wild animal encounter, maybe even a bad fall in the woods. Something that could be explained away easily. "Just take it easy, Eric," Mike had told me the last time I was at the station. "Get some rest, clear your head. We'll be here when you're ready to come back." I didn't know if I could go back. I stood at the window of my small cabin, staring out at the woods beyond. It was evening now, the last light of the sun filtering through the dense pines, casting long shadows across the ground. The same woods where I had been attacked, where _ had come for me. The woods seemed different now, darker. Even in the daylight, they didn't feel the same. Every tree looked twisted. Every shadow seemed to hold something sinister, waiting just out of sight. I knew that was just my mind playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake it. The fear had lodged itself deep in my chest, and it wouldn't let go. I couldn't explain it to anyone. They hadn't seen it. They hadn't felt the raw, primal terror of being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. And without proof, without anything concrete, I was alone with it. Alone with the memory of that night. I turned away from the window, trying to push the thoughts out of my head. I needed a distraction. I moved to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grabbed a beer. The cold bottle felt good in my hand, grounding me in the moment, pulling me away from the edge of panic that always seemed to be lurking just beneath the surface. As I took a long drink, the radio on the counter crackled to life. It was the station's frequency, and I had left it on out of habit, even though I wasn't officially working. I couldn't fully disconnect from the job, even if I wanted to. "Base to Ranger Daniels, you there?" It was Mike's voice, calm and steady as always. I stared at the radio for a moment, debating whether to answer. I knew what he wanted, probably just another check-in, asking how I was holding up, making sure I hadn't gone off the deep end. But I wasn't in the mood to be patronized. "Come on, Eric, just give me a quick response. Let me know you're still alive out there." I sighed and reached for the radio. "Daniel's here." "Hey man," Mike's voice came through, relief in his tone. "Just checking in. How you doing?" I hesitated before answering. "Fine. Getting by." There was a pause on the other end. "Look, I know you don't want to hear this again, but you should really come back to the station. Take some desk work for a while. Ease yourself back in. We'll get you back out there eventually, but you need to." "I'm fine, Mike." I cut him off more harshly than I intended. I took another swig of beer, trying to calm the tension building in my chest. "I don't need to come back yet." He was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear him choosing his next words carefully. "All right, just don't isolate yourself too much, okay? You know we're here if you need anything." "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. I clicked off the radio and set it back on the counter, turning my attention to the growing darkness outside the window. The shadows had deepened, the sky a deep blue now, fading into black. I stared out at the tree line, feeling that familiar unease creeping up my spine. The cabin felt too quiet, too isolated. I should have felt safe here, miles away from the spot where the attack happened. But safety was an illusion now. The thing that had attacked me, it was still out there, somewhere in the vast wilderness. And no one would believe me. Not until it was too late. I finished the beer and set the bottle on the counter, my hands still trembling slightly. I turned off the lights, hoping maybe the darkness would help me sleep. But as I made my way toward the bedroom, I heard something. A faint rustling, just outside the cabin. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I waited, listening, straining to hear over the sound of my own rapid breathing. _snap, _ a branch, breaking outside. My blood ran cold. I moved slowly toward the window, careful not to make any noise. My hands were shaking now, the fear rushing back with a vengeance. I peered through the glass, out into the trees, my breath catching in my throat. At first, I saw nothing, just the familiar shapes of the pines, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. But then, just at the edge of the tree line, I saw it. A shadow, darker than the night around it. Massive, hulking. It stood just inside the forest, partially hidden by the trees, but there was no mistaking it. The creature. It was back, and it was watching. I stumbled away from the window, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to do something. To run. To call for help. But what good would it do? No one believed me. No one would believe me. The creature had come back, but this time, it wasn't to attack. Not yet. It was to remind me that it was still out there, that it was always watching, that I wasn't safe. I backed away from the window, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I fumbled for the radio on the counter, but my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. I clicked it on, my voice trembling. "Mike, you need to get out here," I whispered. "It's back. It's..." The radio crackled, but no reply came. Just static. I clicked it again, harder this time. "Mike, it's here. It's outside my cabin." Still nothing. The radio fell silent, the static cutting out entirely. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. And then I heard it again. A low, guttural growl just outside the door.